right, so this time we're going to do complex numbers and solving by square roots. And you're like, Ms. Hughes, we've already done solving by square roots. We're going to add a little bit twist to it. So we're going to start with our problem, 2x squared plus 2x equals negative 10. So if you notice, we've got an x squared term and we have a constant term, but we don't have a term that just has an x to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by subtracting that 26 from both sides. And that's going to leave us with 2x squared equals negative 36. So then what I want to do is divide both sides by 2. And I get x squared equals negative 18. And then solving by square roots would tell me I take the square root of both sides. So that would leave me with x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 18. And this is when everybody starts jumping up and down and hollering at me, Miss Hughes, no, you can't have a negative square root. Okay, so anytime we have a negative inside the square root, what it does is it means that we have what's known as an imaginary number. Like imaginary numbers, I didn't even know there's such a thing. We have imaginary numbers. So by definition, an imaginary number is the square root of negative 1. So we use a symbol, little cursive I here, and I is equal to the square root of negative 1. Okay, so how does that actually help us out, and why would we want to do this, and how does this all kind of come together? Well, what it does is it allows us to break this problem down just a little bit. We know x is equal to plus or minus the square root. Well, negative 18, I can break into two things. I can break into negative 1 times 18. Well, I know what the square root of negative 1 is now. We just learned. It's an imaginary number. So we go ahead and we evaluate that. And that leaves me with I square roots of 18, plus or minus I square roots of 18. Well, 18 I know how to deal with. Now I can take that 18 and I can break it down. We know 18 is 9 and 2, and 9 is 3 and 3. I have a pair of 3s, so I know a 3 is coming out. So now when I write my answer, it's actually plus or minus 3 times I, so 3I, square roots of 2. 3I square roots of 2, because 2 is what was left out inside. So by us knowing or defining this negative, this imaginary number, we're now able to give us a solution of plus or minus 3I square roots of 2. Now, if we were to actually graph this, we couldn't graph this on our normal coordinate plane, because we know our normal coordinate plane is made up of all of our real numbers. We would actually have to graph an imaginary number on a different coordinate plane that actually had imaginary numbers on it. We're not going to have to graph them at this time, so you don't need to really worry about that. So let's go to another problem, see if we can make this work. Kind of get you used to this idea. So let's say we have x squared equals negative 5. Well, so then what we're going to do is take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 5. All right, negative 5. Here again, we're going to break that down into negative 1 times 5. So we know x is going to be equal to plus or minus, all right, square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 5, we can't evaluate that, and we can't break it down any further. So our answer is x equals plus or minus I square roots of 5. Let's try one like this. X squared equals, let's say, negative 16. So here again, take the square root of both of those sides. X equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times 16. Square root of negative 1 is I. And then square root of 16. Square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4. So that 4 is also going to come out, and our answer is going to be plus or minus 4I. So x is equal to plus or minus 4I. We can actually move on to problems that are a little bit more difficult, have a little bit more stuff on them, but it's all the same basic process. X minus 2 squared equals the square equals negative 6. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And I'm left with x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 6. So we're going to bring that 2 over. 2 plus or minus, and we're going to evaluate this. The negative, remember this is negative 1 times 6, so the negative 1 comes out as an I. And we can't simplify 6 any further, so we're left with 2 plus or minus I square roots of 6. Just want to remind you that is two answers. That's x equals 2 plus I square roots of 6 and x equals 2 minus I square roots of 6. So we do have two answers here, just like we've done with our other problems. All right, let's take a look at another one. This one's a little bit more complex. Negative 2 x plus 2 squared minus 5 equals 8. Okay, so we're going to start by bringing that 5 over. Negative 2 x plus 2 squared equals 13. I'm going to divide by that negative 2. Then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I'm left with x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2, and we got that negative that's sitting in there. Okay, so we got a couple different things that we need to handle in this situation. First off, we know that we can't have a square root, a fraction with a square root here. So we're going to need to take care of that, and then we're also going to need to take care of this 2 on the side. So let's start by taking care of the 2. X equals negative 2 plus or minus. I'm going to go ahead and break this up. Now, if you notice, I'm going to go ahead and move that negative up to the top. It doesn't really matter. It's on the top or the bottom. I'll break this to look like this. Square root of negative 13, square root of 2. So we're going to get rid of that 2. So we're going to rationalize that 2. So that means that if I'm going to do a little happy little thought cloud over here, little workspace, I've got square root of negative 13 over the square root of 2. I want to multiply that top and bottom by the square root of 2. Just a really crazy looking version of 1. So that's going to give me the square root of negative 26 over, well, square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we're looking at negative 26 over 2. Now, if you notice, we took care of the radical in the denominator problem, but what we haven't taken care of is that I. So not a big deal. We know that x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus. We know that 26, negative 26 is just negative 1 and 26. So that negative is just going to come out as an I. And then we've got that 26. We need to see, will it break down? Well, 26 is 2 and 13. 2 and 13 are both prime numbers, so it's not going to break down any further. So we're going to leave 26 inside. We'll have it over 2. So our answers here are negative 2 plus or minus I square roots of 26 over 2. That's about as hard as it gets here. So I'm going to give you some time to look at your homework and practice on that, and we'll talk about this when we get back to class.